everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. It was for a good cause. Anyway, but still, I hate to even have you waiting a few minutes. So let me just pull up the Navi. I've got all the commentaries ready. Let's just get that Navi up there. And let's get that into 27 to 28. Here we go. Okay. Let's first again say hello. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to do some very interesting learning today as we continue with where we left off. You will remember that we left off with King Saul, Melech Shaul. Something is happening inside of him, something different from any time before in his life. When he was named King of Israel, when he was anointed, he was immediately regarded, he was tall and strong and fearless. There was the challenge with Goliath of Gath, in which he was not ready to fight him, and no one was, and young David came, and you know that story. But other than that, Saul was very powerful. On two occasions, though, he acted against the way of God, and for that he lost his kingdom. First of all, he was commanded to wipe out the Amalekites, and he did not. He did defeat them in victory, in battle, but he left the king behind. And we learned a midrash that the king impregnated a Jewish prison guard while he was being held until prophet Shmuel ultimately executed him. And from that woman came a child, initially Jewish, but tribally also from Agag, or maybe it was a non-Jewish prison guard. And if you'll say that's not believable, it actually was in the news 3 months ago before all the current Hamas stuff began. The thing that Israel's national crisis was, there's always a crisis. Every day there's a crisis. The crisis was, it came out that some Arab terrorist in the prisons was having regular intercourse with one of the Jewish prison guards, a female, which just caused an incredible national scandal that resulted in actually policy change that women no longer will be prison guards in Israel in contact with prisoners. But it really brought home that it could happen. Like you say, how could that be that a prisoner like King Agag would actually be able to have physical intimacy with, well, he did. And that was one of Shaul's two sins. And the other thing was that he was supposed to wait for the prophet Samuel, if you recall, at a particular offering of sacrifice, and he did not wait. And God took away the kingdom, the dynasty, but actually it was going to be taken away one way or another, because destiny was that David was going to be the king of Israel. And the tribe and the kingship was going to go to the tribe of Judah, Yehudah. Shaul was from the tribe of Benjamin. And it was God's way of bringing Benjamin, back into the Jewish people. For those of you who have been with me when we studied about the Pelegish Megivah, the concubine of Giva, we did that Sunday mornings for a few classes. The tribe of Benjamin almost was wiped out. And it was part of God's way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way, of bringing Benjamin back into the Jewish people by having the very first king of Israel come from the tribe of Benjamin, thereby legitimizing the tribe in the eyes of the nation. But beyond that, ultimately, it was the tribe of Yehudah, Judah, that would be the tribe from which the dynasty would come and continue to Messiah, to Mashiach. And David inevitably was going to be king one way or another. Saul lost it on his own, but one way or another was going to happen. From that moment, Saul began internalizing that his son, Yonatan, will not become king. He became increasingly obsessed. And he always had a certain kind of, well, I don't like to speak that casually about it, but what seems like a kind of a clinical depression. Not just a depression that my baseball team didn't make the World Series, but like an ongoing clinical depression where we have good times and we'd have bad times. And when you have those bad times, it really turned on David. And he'd become obsessed with killing David to prevent David from ever becoming king and taking the dynasty. Why do we live? For a lot of reasons. We live to have fun. We live to eat good food. We live to hear good music and laugh. But really, we live for more meaningful things than that, I hope. And for each of us, meaningfulness takes on slightly different aspects. And then there are some things that universally are meaningful to us. For me, part of a meaningful life is learning Torah, teaching Torah, and being passionate about the Jewish people. For some others, meaningfulness could be practicing law, or a doctor healing people, or a garbage man or woman cleaning the street efficiently. Different people find different meaning in life. But the universal thing we have, if we have children, we have a particular passion for our children. And if we don't have children, we often displace that to our nieces and nephews if we have them. There's that kind of a thing. Consequently, for Saul, he became obsessed for his son. He wanted, I can't give the kingship to my kids. There are certain things I could give them, and I've tried my best to give it to them. And then there are certain things I can't. I can't give them the kingship. Nobody's got it, but I don't know. And so I'm certainly no king. But he had the kingship, and he wanted to give that to his son. And he became obsessed to stop David. And we've been learning for weeks and weeks about how he pursued David. And he actually wiped out the city of Nov, the Kohanim, the priests, because he wrongly accused them of insubordination and treason when they unknowingly simply provided David with food, shelter, and a single sword, that of the one that David had used to kill Goliath. He pursued David, trying to kill him. And we learned how David tried to send a message to him rationally, because what else could he do? So one time he cut a garment. He got so close to Saul, as Saul was sleeping, he cut his garment and said, look, this is how close I came to you. I could have killed you. And Saul backed off and said, Beni David. He said, my son, David, my son, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll never come after you again. And then he turned and he started coming after him again. And we learned just recently, more recently in our classes, that David the following time sneaked in the middle of the night with one of his men. They took Saul's spear and went back and said, look, I don't want to tear your royal robe again. I took your spear. And again, Saul responds. And that's kind of where we're up to. David, we then said, he just decided, I can't trust Saul. I just can't, Shaul in Hebrew. I can't trust him. Even when he promises me, and he sincerely means that he'll never try to hurt me again, I can't trust him. And so David puts his life on the line and goes back to live among the Philistines, where he's wanted dead or alive for having killed Goliath. But that was years ago. And King Achish right now, he accepts that David sincerely is a traitor to the Jews. David presents, I can't live in Israel. The king of Israel wants to kill me. I've had it. I can't live like that. I want him dead. So I'm joining your side. I want to kill him. And do you trust him? The king trusts him. And David, the king says, I'd like you to be like my bodyguard. And I'd like you to live right near me. David has other plans. He's not really a traitor. And he persuades the king, hey, look, I came here with 600 men. I have a whole army. I'm the commander of a unofficial army of insurgents. And we're here with our wives and kids. So do the math. For one man, one wife, 2 kids, 4 times 4. If you have 600 people, it's like 2,400, 2,500 people. So he says, look, I'm here with like 2,500 people. So you don't want 2,500 people here. So I have a better idea. Let me stay on the other side of the country. I'll always be there for you if you need me. And I won't be in your way. And the king says, fine. So the king sends him to the other side. Nowadays, if David and the other side of the country would be running wild, killing people unauthorizedly, it would be in the news. It would be on social media. It would be all over the place. But there was no social media, radio, TV, whatnot. And so David could get away with a lot of stuff. And we learned David was going around every day with his men, killing out the local tribes that actually were perilous to Israel next door. It was just like Mexico's on the border with the U.S., Canada's on the border with the U.S., Philistines are on the border with Israel. And then on the other side, just as on one side we have Mexico, the other side we have Canada. On one side, Israel had the Philistines, and the other side they had Moab and Amnon, and then there's the Amalekites, and there's all these otherites. So David was smiting them, and he was taking their goods, looting them, and living off that. His army was living off the looting of these nations whom David and his men killed to prevent them from fighting against Israel. And they killed everybody so that there would be no one living to go to the King Achish later on and saying, I'm a survivor of, here's what your man David's been doing. And so that's what David's up to. Meanwhile, back to Saul. Word comes to Saul that Achish and the Philistines are ready to make a tremendous battle. And it's a little bit like what Israel deals with Hamas. Hopefully, in the foreseeable year, it'll come to an end. I don't know what's going to be. I don't know whether American pressure is going to prevent Israel from having a victory, whether Israel is going to have the support of America, whether the forthcoming presidential elections less than a year from now, whether Biden will decide, I got to support Israel to keep the Jewish vote, whether Biden will decide the Jews who support me couldn't care less about Israel. All they care about is the climate. And in the meantime, I'm losing the young people's vote because they're all for Palestine, even though there's no such thing as Palestine. I don't know what's going to happen. And then you got the Republicans, and they'll be gung-ho for Israel. It's a standard thing in the United States. Whichever party's out of power, they're 1,000,000% for Israel. You know, when they're in power, it's like the two competing shoe stores. One shoe store is selling a pair of shoes for $600. The other guy's got a sign in the window, those shoes for $30. So the person goes to buy the shoes for $30. The owner of the shoe store said, I don't have them in stock now, I'll have them next week. So the guy goes across the street. He says, I'd really like to get this pair of shoes, but you're charging $600. I was just, and the other guy was $30, just happens to be out of stock. So the fellow with the $600 says, in my shoe store, they're also $30 when I'm out of stock. So that's sort of what happens when the Republicans are out of power. They couldn't be more pro-Israel. Democrats, and then when the Democrats are out of power and the Republicans are out, Democrats couldn't be more pro-Israel, except for the squad. And so we have to see what happens now as Israel goes to war. And will they continue war? They promise, they assure the voters and the electorate and the public that after they're finished with this prisoner hostage thing, they're going back to war. Otherwise, there's going to be complete chaos in the country. So this is what's going on with David and with Saul. That historically, like Hamas would make a war every 3 years. They build up for a war. Israel fights back. But then Israel stops before victory, having mowed the lawn, having decreased Hamas's ability to fight. And the idea is, the expression is, we mow the lawn, and they'll leave us alone for 3 years till they're ready for the next war. And that's what's going on with the Philistines. Every 3 years, they're ready for a war. You have Goliath, David kills him, no more war for a few years. Then they build up. Thank God in those days they didn't have tunnels. And so now they build a new war. And a new war. Now they're ready for the next war. And just like Hamas used a few years' time from being weakened to suddenly becoming as strong as they've ever been, so this is what happened to Philistines. And Shaul, he takes a look, and a fear envelops him. It's shocking. He's never had this before. He's always gone into battle fearless. There's a fear. And it ties in, you could say, with his clinical depression, his up and down, whether you want to call it clinical depression, whether you want to call it, bipolar, with those highs and then those lows. He's on a low now. And he doesn't know what to do. And in a moment like this, he normally would go to the Kohanim, the Kohens, the priests. And the high priest, Kohen Gadol, would have the Urim V'Tumim, would have the breastplate, the Choshen, with the slip of parchment that, when inserted, allows him to communicate to God. And the Kohen would ask questions of God on behalf of the king. And the king would ask and would be able to go into battle confidently. But he can't communicate with the Kohanim. He can't communicate with God because he can't communicate with the Kohanim to speak to God. Why not? Because after he massacred all the Kohanim, all the Kohens in Nov, the few survivors, like the son of the king, of the Kohen Gadol, of the high Kohen, who fled to David's side, didn't want to get near Saul. So Saul can't get to a Kohen. And he wants to ask. He's used to that. He always could ask in advance, what should I expect? So he does something extraordinary. And he decides, I got to find a fortune teller, someone who can call up a ghost. We learned last week, and we'll look as we get to the text right now that I've done that review. And we've had some new people now here in class tonight, so I wanted to catch everyone up. He's looking for someone who can call up a ghost. I mean, nowadays, do you believe someone can call up a ghost? And yet I know people who, not many, maybe one, I was going to say no one in my shul. There's one who claims they do it for entertainment. And I've tried to explain that's not what we do for entertainment. Like, you wouldn't want your spouse to go to a brothel for entertainment, right? If the guy goes to the brothel, and he says, look, honey, I'm just going to go for the night, but it's only for entertainment. I love you more than anything in the world. It's just entertainment. So that doesn't work, right? So in the same way, God Almighty says, that's not entertainment. But I know one or two or three people who do this. And I mentioned last class, like Newport Beach, a place with, like, I imagine some sophisticated people. There's a lot of very fine doctors there. Most of my doctors, and boy, do I have doctors, are in Newport Beach. But there's a fortune-telling place at Newport Beach. And it's been there for 15 years. Every time you drive up Newport Avenue, it's still there. I mean, I know there are a lot of businesses that have gone out of business during COVID, they don't go out of business. According to Halakha, Jewish law, not allowed to go to these places. And I don't know what people believe, and when they go to such a place, if it's just entertainment or a little bit they're thinking, read my palm, or whatever they come up with. But it's forbidden in Jewish law by the Torah. It's a Torah commandment, one of the 613 commandments, actually several commandments. Not allowed to go to a fortune teller, someone calls up ghosts, someone who makes cuts in someone to divine something. But Saul is desperate, and he extraordinarily violates his own law. He made an announcement as king of Israel. He has power of life and death. A king of Israel has power of life and death. It's not like the modern day king and queen of England, like Elizabeth II. So everybody loves her. She can't do anything wrong. What does she do? She basically gets up there. She's got the white gloves and she waves. And that's it. What does she stand for? She stands for England. I mean, she passed away, very nice lady. I don't want to knock her, but it's basically that we get the wrong idea what a queen and a king is. modern day idea of a king and a queen is someone like that, or King Charles. Poor guy at the way. It's a real, I don't know what that's like. If mom is alive, I could never get to be king till she finally dies. But I love her. So I don't know if I should want her to. It's very interesting. Anyway, she lived forever. It's like he figured, I wonder what that's like. Like at one point, if he talks to Carmela and says, I'm never going to get to be king. I'm like 600 years old and mom is 640. I'm never going to make it. So, but anyway, these kings, they're very sweet. They're very lovely. The king of Jordan, they refer to him in Israel as Hamelech HaKatan, the little king, both in height and in power. He's nothing. Kings today are like nothing. But in the Middle Ages, you ever see a good movie about something to do with England, anything with Peter O'Toole? The movie always starts, somebody getting beheaded by order of the King of England. That's how they do it. So that power, like the kind of power to go ahead and have people beheaded, that's what the King of Israel had, not going around beheaded, but yes, to have people executed. Just by a snap of the finger, he could have anybody executed if he felt someone is not loyal to him, which is why he's trying to kill David. He's not looking for a jury. He's not looking for a trial. He simply wants him dead. And so by his order, anyone who tries to raise up a ghost will be executed by order of the king in conformity with the Torah. And with all that background, and I'll take questions a little bit later, and I will take questions. Tonight's class, absolutely. I look forward to the questions. But right now, let me just get rolling with some text, and then I'll ask questions. Then we'll take some questions. Let's go rolling with some text. So we're here in Samuel 27, Shmuel Chaf Zayin. We were at the end of it. David already had arranged to be in a different part of the area. And David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Gizrites, the Amalekites, all the way to Shur, to the land of Egypt. When he attacked the region, he would leave no man or woman alive. He would take flocks, herds, asses, camels, and basically clean them out. That's how war was fought in those days. Achish would ask, what did you do today? Where did you raid today? And David would say, usual places. I was attacking the Jews. I attacked the Negev. Let's see if I have the map. I have the map somewhere. Try that. Oh, I was attacking the Jews. So remember, David, this is Gath, where Achish is. Achish is in Gath. And David is in Tziklag, sort of like the other side of the kingdom. Close enough compared to this, compared to all that, but far enough away that Achish doesn't know what's going on. And this is Israel. And you got the king of Israel. Both sides of the Jordan River are Israel. And David's in Tziklag, and he says, I was just attacking in the south, like here, the Negev, deep beyond the Dead Sea, Yam HaMelech, the Salt Sea, sort of King Saul's southern region. He just can't keep up with me. And that's what I've been doing. And so that's very acceptable to the king. So that's what I've been doing. Nothing. And David would leave no one alive who could then come back to Gath. For he was afraid he might tell about us. David did this, David did that. So that's what he did, as long as he stayed in the territory of the Philistines. And we finished the chapter of 27. Achish trusted David. He thought, he has aroused the wrath of his own people Israel, and so he will be my vassal forever. He trusted him. It's very interesting. It was discussed in great detail after World War II. We got a certain number of German scientists came to the United States. Many had been Nazis, and they gave their scientific knowledge over to the United States to help us build our space program and beat the Russians. But the question always was, did they really abandon their Nazi Hitler feelings? They were helping us, but you could take the Hitler out of, you could take the Nazi out of Germany or whatever. But could you take the German out of the Nazi or whatever? And you had these guys like Werner von Braun. And the question was, did they ever really stop being Nazis? And we took a certain number of those people. And there's the Israeli program. There was an Israeli hit TV series that then was made into an American TV series, Homeland. For any of you that ever saw Homeland. And in the first season or two, the storyline was that an American soldier had been taken prisoner by Arab Muslims in Iraq and held prisoner for X number of years till the United States managed to get him back home in a prisoner exchange. And believe me, even in fiction, it wasn't 1,000 to 1. No one but Israel gives up 1,000 people for one, or 3 for 1. But anyway, and by the way, I don't like that exchange at all. I'm not praising Israel for doing it. So anyway, the storyline of Homeland is that the guy comes back to the United States and he's a national hero, having survived 5 years imprisonment by ISIS. And the storyline is a gigantic question mark. Is this national hero back home an American patriot, or did they brainwash him and turn him into a Muslim, into an ISIS Muslim? And is he secretly now a danger to the United States? Interesting storyline. And that's what's going on here with David. And so as we finish chapter 27, and we'll take a question in a moment, as we finish chapter 27, Achish felt he is totally turned on Israel, and I can count on him. And it was at that time that the Philistines mustered their forces for war to take the field against Israel. And Achish said to David, of course, you've got to march with us. You are going to be part of our army now. You can't just sit this one out. And David said, you surely know what your servant will do. He doesn't say, I will fight. He simply says, you know what your servant will do. In that case, Achish replies, I'll appoint you my bodyguard for life. Asimcha, shomer leroshi, asimcha kol hayamim. You will guard my head. Now, a segue, very important. We're about to go into a fascinating segue, because the text is giving us the segue to explain to us why King Saul, out of desperation, is going to do the impossible, the unthinkable, and seek out a ghost raiser. He can't go to a Kohen, a priest, to communicate with God, and at least he, in the past, could go to the prophet Samuel, and say to Samuel, I need your guidance as a prophet of God before I go into battle. But we're being told now that Samuel just died and is not a lot available either. And because of that, in desperation, King Saul will seek out a ghost raiser. But we're going to talk a lot about this idea of Samuel dying. But first, Janet, what's your question? Janet, please unmute yourself. And what is your question? Okay. Well,
wait, Rabbi, it took me a while to get back from my chair. Remember, we are facing the TV? Sorry. So one parenthetical note regarding the monarchy in England. If you recall, just before Queen Elizabeth died, she appointed the last prime minister. She actually does have some governance duties. If there is a complete stalemate in Parliament, I don't know after how many tries and to form a government, then she has the duty to, or the monarch, he now King Charles, has the duty to appoint the prime minister. I don't know and maybe it's when Parliament throws up its hands and say we can't resolve this, but then it resorts back to the monarch. And there's
Thank
a
you very
couple
much.
other little duties
What
like
else
that
is on your
too.
agenda, Janet? What else would you like to? Anything else?
That's it. It was just that,
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Take the hand sign down so that if you have another question later, I'll know that you've got a new question. Great. And anyone can always just indicate that you have a question, and I welcome them very much. Because a teacher answers questions very, very gladly. Okay, let's go back to the text screen share. All right, so here comes a midrash I want to discuss, and this is going to be from Baba Batra. It's from the Talmud, and Daf Yud Daled Amud Bet, folio 14b. And for this, let's just take a look at that text another moment so we understand context. Shmuel met by Espedulo Ko Yisrael. Shmuel the prophet dies, and the entire nation mourns for him. Vayikbaruhu b'Ramah u'v'iro, and he was buried in the city Ramah. And I mentioned last class, for those who have heard of Camp Ramah, it's named for the place where Shmuel held court. V'sha'ol hisir ha'avot v'edayud mi'ha'aretz. And meanwhile, Saul had banned all ghost raisers and spirit raisers from the land. Now, the Gemara has a question to ask. This is a complete segue, but very interesting. And for this, I have to give you background, because if I don't do it now, we lose the opportunity to learn this. And you know that we learn the text, but we never lose a chance beyond the text.
Sure.
And so,
Yes.
Can I get you anything else?
No.
quiet
I'm
down.
sorry.
You tell me to.
Uh-huh.
I'll have dessert of some kind.
There's
Pineapples.
Okay.
Pineapples are great, and that'll take care of that. And we go forward. Okay. So the Gemara raises the following: who wrote the Bible? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Who wrote the Bible? Well, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, I've taught this many, many times, so we'll not devote time to it now. The Torah, every word of the Torah, we believe, was dictated by God Almighty to Moses, to Moshe. And Moshe took dictation, literally. I'm not just making a joke or being casual. He was like a secretary taking dictation. There's a debate in the Talmud. Some say God dictated the entire Torah to Moshe at the very end of his life. Some say God dictated segments of the Torah, at different periods in the course of the 40 years that the Jews were traveling through the wilderness. And Moshe would be building that scroll, getting bigger and bigger, and he would write a new scroll and sew it to the previous scroll. But he wrote it all by God's dictate. And the question they ask is, what about the last 12 Pesukim, the last 12 verses of the Torah, which speak about Moshe going up to Mount Nebo and dying? And it says, and Moses died. How could he have written that? And then there's more, and the nation mourned for him, but he died. And there's a debate. Some say the last 12 verses were written by Joshua, his disciple, his apostle. And some say God dictated those 12 verses to him to write just before he died. And he wrote it, according to the Talmud, with tears in his eyes. And then the Talmud talks about who wrote the other books. See, the first 5 books we have to take, every single word is the word of God. The books of the prophets, we believe, were not dictated by God, but written by human beings, men, who wrote with the inspiration of God, divine inspiration. So it's not like just a guy sitting and writing, but it was not God dictating the words. It was rather the writer, the prophet, feeling the divine inspiration as he wrote it. And the Talmud tells us certain people wrote certain books. And we are told Samuel wrote the book of 1 Samuel. And it raises the question. We still have 3 more chapters to go. Runs to chapter 31. Runs till 28, 29, 30. We have 4 more chapters to go. And Samuel just died at the end of 27, beginning of 28. So how, if we've been told that he wrote the book, all 31 chapters, and he dies 4 chapters before the end of the book. So the Talmud's bothered by this. So the Gemara asks, it says right here that Samuel died. So what's cooking? So, as I said, we're Bava Batra, 14b. Folio 14b. Umikatavan, and the Gemara asks, who wrote the books? Moshe Katav Sifro, Uporashat Balaam V'Iyov. Moses wrote basically the Torah. Yehoshua Katav Sifro. Joshua wrote his book, the book of Joshua. Ushmona Psukim Shabbat Torah, and the last 8 verses of the Torah that discuss Moshe dying. Shmuel, about whom we're learning now, Katav Sifro V'Shoftim V'Rut. Interesting. Samuel is the author of the book of 1 Samuel and the book of Judges that we learned last year. It's Deborah, Gideon, Samson, Shimshon. I could go on. And then Verut. Samuel wrote the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges, before the lifetime of Samuel. David, King David, Katav Sefer Tehillim. He famously wrote the book of Psalms. Al Yedei Asara Zekenim. And he had additional sages who wrote some of the Psalms. There's certain Psalms that are attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses. There are certain Psalms that are attributed to the sons of Korach. Lamnatseach Livnei Korach Mizmor is the famous one we recite 7 times before we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah. There are certain Psalms attributed to the pilgrims, Shir HaMa'alot. So, but the vast majority of Psalms, we believe, were written by David, which is part of what makes David so eternally unique. Not only was he a king who was righteous and almost perfect, and when he sinned, capable of atoning on the highest level of atonement, but he also wrote the praises of God and was consumed by a love of God. And that's why David Melech Yisrael, David the king of Israel, will live forever. And Mashiach will come from David. And so we continue. Some Psalms, some Tehillim were written by Adam Harishon, by Adam, the original Adam of creation. Wrote some, Al Yedei Malki Tzedek, Al Yedei Abraham, Al Yedei Moshe, Al Yedei Haman, not Haman, Al Yedei Yudutan, Al Yedei Asaf, but the vast majority, and as I said, the 3 sons of Bnei Korach. Jeremiah, Katav Sifro, Yirmiyahu wrote the book of Jeremiah, the Sefer Malachim, and he wrote the book of 1 Kings and 2 Kings, the Keynote, and he wrote the book of Eicha, Lamentations. Got that? Samuel wrote 1 Samuel, Judges, and Ruth. Jeremiah wrote Jeremiah, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and Lamentations. Chizkiah v'siato kotvu, and Hezekiah and those of his wrote books like Isaiah and Mishlei. Well, certain books were written by Solomon. Mishlei, Proverbs, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. And Anshe Knesset Agdolah Katvu Yechezkel Shnei Masar. And the men of the great assembly wrote the book of Ezekiel and the 12 shorter prophet books like Haggai, Habakkuk, Jonah, those 12 shorter prophet books. Daniel, the men of the great assembly signed with those, and then you had Daniel, Megillat Esther, which they wrote. There's a whole discussion. Did Esther have any role in the writing? Ezra Katav Sivro, and Ezra wrote the book of Ezra, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is very much, and that raises a question. I'm going to go forward. There's a fascinating discussion about all this extra, but I have to go forward because we never have enough time to learn everything. There's just so much to learn, so much to learn. So as far as this thing about Shmuel Katav Sifro, we said Samuel wrote his book, but the Gemara asks for Hakativ Shmuel met, but it says at the beginning of chapter 28 that Samuel died. So what about the last 4 chapters? And what about the second Samuel? Shmuel bet we're about to learn in a few weeks. To aske God achozah v'natan navi. The Gemara answers, after Samuel, there are 2 more great prophets. God, not God, not G-O-D, but God. And God, achozah, God was the seer, was a prophet. And Nathan, Natan HaNavi, Natan is the one who, for example, is sent by God to call David out after the incident with Bathsheba. How did David know that he had done wrong? He was approached by the prophet, the Navi, who brought him the word of God. That was the prophet Natan. So after Shmuel died, at the beginning of chapter 28, the text of chapters 28 to 31 of 1 Samuel and all of 2 Samuel were written by those 2 prophets. So that's something interesting that we now learned that we didn't know before about the writing. And that brings us, of course, take a quick look as we did last week. The Torah in Leviticus, Vayikra, Chafal of chapter 21 explicitly says, in Pasuk of Zion, verse 27, V'isha Isha, Ki yehiyeh bahem ov oyidoni mot yumatu. A man or woman who has a ghost. You don't have a ghost. I mean, sure, for kids' birthday, you could buy them a Casper doll, assuming people still remember who Casper was. He was the friendly ghost. Nowadays, in the old days, it was such a different world. You know, really, like the whole culture. In the old days, ghosts were friendly. Casper was a friendly ghost. And everything was the Wizard of Oz. Everything was not complicated. There were good guys and there were bad guys. And the good guys always won in the 1950s and 1960s. The Adventures of Superman. The bad guys, they never had a chance. In 22-minute black and white episode, you knew they were going to get caught by Superman and he was going to bang their heads together and hand them over to Inspector Henderson. It was always easy. Culture was easy. The cowboys wore white and they won. America changed. And I'm guilty too. Because I like The Godfather. But America taught us to root for mafia figures. I mean, think about it. Something happened in America. We rooted for the Sopranos. We root for bad guys. So yeah, we root for good guys, but we root for bad guys. And they could be bloodthirsty, but we still like them. America changed it, deconstructed the culture. And it's not the world. And that's why you should know a lot of Orthodox Jews among the Haredi population, particularly, no longer own televisions. They throw it's a thing, throw the television out of the house. Among matchmakers, shadchanim, matchmakers, in the Haredi world, that's a requirement. A family goes, we have a son or a daughter, we're trying to find a nice match. And on the checklist of the matchmaker, all right, will you have a television in your house? No, of course not. And we expect the girl you give us is not going to have a TV. No TVs. And it's a requirement. The woman says, or the man says, I'd like to have a TV. No match. There's a tremendous movement like that, just to get the TVs out of the house. Because as enjoyable and entertaining as these shows are, so many of them corrupt values. And you see what happened in America today. There's no respect for authority. The police, it's in the old days, in the 60s, if I tell you police in the 1960s, Car 54, where are you? They were the good guys. Officer Tootie, ooh, and Officer Francis, they were good guys. Mullen, or whatever, Muldoon, they were good guys. Everybody was a good guy. The neighborhood loved them. Now, police shows they're corrupt. The cops are corrupt. The lawyers are corrupt. Everybody's corrupt. The old days, lawyers were Perry Mason. The lawyers were good, honorable people. It's just, I mean, it's entertaining because it's surprising. Like humor. We laugh because that's a surprising line. I didn't see it coming. That's funny. That's clever. That's humor. But culture, it's a shame. Kids are brought up with it. You don't think about it when the kids are growing up. What's wrong with the Godfather? And then the kids grow up and you see their value. You look at what's going on in the colleges. You realize a generation's been raised with corrupted values. So the Torah is telling us that these guys, they can't be around. No ghosts, no ghost raising, stuff like that. So what happens in our text? Nevertheless, Shmuel met, and Saul had banned all the ghost raisers. And the incredibly strong army of the Philistines encamps in Shunem, and Saul encamps in Gilboa. What does that mean? Well, part of our class is to make things understandable. So let's see. David has been in Tziklag, Achish ben Gath. He now marches his soldiers to Shunem. And Saul marches his army to Mount Gilboa. And from the mountaintop of Gilboa, you could look down on Shunem and see a terrifying army. That's the value of having the heights. Like Israel's got the Golan Heights and they're not about to give it up. If you have the heights, you look down on the other side, you could see what they're up to. Until 1967, Syria had the heights and looked down on the kibbutzim of northern Israel. So that's not, once Israel conquered those heights, they're not giving them up. Here, Achish marches on Shunem, Saul marches on Gilboa, and he looks down. And it's like in the movie Spartacus, when he sees the size of the Roman army. How are you going to fight those people? They're just overwhelming numbers, and they're all strong. By the way, this is right. There's Gilboa, there's Shunem, and there's a place called Endor. File it in your mind for a moment. Endor. Okay. So, by our Shul Machane Plishtim, Saul sees the camp of the Philistines, and he trembles with fear. By the way, that word Haredi, the Haredim, the Haredis, the Haredi Jews, they take that name, they fear God, sort of like the way, not making a joke or a pun, the way that a Christian denomination took on the name Quakers because they quake. Not anymore, I guess, but back then, the original Quakers in Philadelphia quake as they would think about God. Today's Quakers are nothing like that. Their basic contribution to the world now is that they hate Israel. Haredi Take that name. Vayecharad, tremble before God. So he trembled. Vayashal Shaul b'Hashem v'lo anahu Hashem. Saul prayed to God, please speak to me, please tell me. Gam b'chalamot, gam ba'urim, gam b'neviim. And there was no prophet to come to him because Samuel had just died. There were no Urim because the Kohanim, the priests, were staying away from him and hiding from him. He hoped at least God would come to him in a dream, but God did not come in a dream. So Saul said to his men, find me a woman who consults ghosts. God's not communicating with me. There's no prophet, there's no Kohen. At least if he would come to me in a dream, a vivid dream that I would know it's from God. But I'm not getting such a dream. I need a woman that raises up the ghosts so I can inquire. And his courtiers told him, there actually is a woman in Endor. I just showed you, Endor. So he's in Gilboa, Philistines are in Shunem, and next door is Endor. And they say next door in Endor is someone who consults ghosts. Ba'alat Ov. She raises up, she's an Ov. Where did we see that word Ov? Just a minute ago in the Hebrew in Leviticus, Vayikra. You're forbidden to have an Ov, someone who raises up the dead. All right. And he decided to go to that woman who raises up the ghosts, and he knew that she'd fear him and run away and hide if she saw Saul coming, because he's issued a royal decree that he's executing any people who raise up ghosts. So he had to disguise himself. So he dresses up in a way that looks nothing like a king. Normally he's seen in his royal outfit. Vayomer Kasomi Naba Ov, and he comes to her and he says, please call up a ghost. Balili Asher Amar, bring up a ghost whom I will tell you of someone deceased. Vatomer Isha Elav, Asher Asa Shaul, Asher Yichrita Avot Yidoni Min Arutz. She's been very careful. She can do it, but she doesn't want to get executed. So it's like I've seen when I watch movies, when people are afraid, is someone trying to lure me? Is it a police officer or an FBI person trying to lure me into committing a crime? And they're very careful, like a drug guy. Are you trying to buy drugs, or are you an FBI drug cop who's trying to trick me into selling you drugs so you can arrest me? And they try to be coy and they try to be careful. So she's been careful. She can do it, but she doesn't want. So she's saying, Saul said how he's banned the use of ghosts, and why are you laying a trap for me to get me killed? And Shaul swore to her by the Lord, by the name of God, as the Lord lives, you won't get into trouble over this. He doesn't say by the Lord's name, I'm not Saul. He won't lie invoking God's name in an oath. But he knows she won't get into trouble because he is Saul and he will not punish her. And the woman says, is it me? She says, she believes this guy, whom she does not know, and says, whom do you want me to call up? Vayomer et Shmuel Ha'alili. I want you to call up the prophet Samuel, and this shakes her. Normally, from the movies, TV, normally it's a man wants to call up his long-lost wife. It's a woman wants to call up a long-lost husband. I need you to call up my husband from the dead. I forgot the credit card number. I need you to call up my wife from the dead. I don't know where she left the house keys. It's sort of like, that's what they normally call up, somebody like that. You don't normally call up the prop. It's not like you go and I'm going to call up, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln. And who are you to call up Abraham Lincoln? And who am I to call up it? Who am I, the ghost caller-upper, to call up Abraham Lincoln? So this shakes her. Don't just call up someone of that. I can call up your father. I can call up your, I mean, I can't really. Whatever shtick that she uses, magic and Tziklag to make it happen, she'll call up some random guy. Vatera Hishat Shmuel Vatizak Bakol Gadol. She goes through the hocus pocus, because she doesn't really call up people. I mean, just between us girls, whatever she does, she doesn't call up people. Whatever smoke and mirrors she does for people, for which she gets money, calls up a husband, a wife, or whatever, she's not really calling up people. She's got a guy in the other room making sounds and noise. You know how it is. It's fake. So what happens here, she goes through the hocus pocus, and she can't believe it. But out of the smoke comes the prophet Samuel from the dead. But Shmuel, but the Zakbakol Gadol. She screams, she shrieks. That is Samuel. But Tomer Yishal Shaul. And the woman says to King Saul, Lama Rimitani Be'atashul, why have you deceived me? You are King Saul, which she figures out because there's no other way on earth that Samuel would have risen up from the dead. She can't do it. She knows she can't do it. She can't believe what she sees. Vayomer lahamelech al tir'i kimara'it. Shaul says, don't be afraid. Just tell me what you see, because she sees Samuel, but he doesn't see. But Tomer ha'isha el Shaul, and the woman says to Saul, Elohim ra'iti olim in ha'aretz, I see a divine being coming up from the ground. I don't understand this myself. I've never seen anything like this. Vayomer la ma ta'aro. And Shaul does not see him. Again, it's like the movies, TV, where one person sees the ghost and no one else does. This woman sees Samuel, the prophet. Saul doesn't see him. So Saul says to her, how do I know you're seeing Samuel? You're from Endor. How do you know what he looks like? I know what he looks like, but I can't see. Describe him. What does he look like? But Tomer ish zakenoleh. She said he's an old man. Hu otemi'il. And he's wearing a certain kind of robe. And her description of the robe persuades Saul, Shaul, this is Shmuel. She doesn't know. I know what the kind of robe he wears. That is he. Vayeda Shaul ki Shmuelhu, vayikotapayim artzav yishtachu. Saul knew affirmatively. I'm going to wrap up class in 5 minutes because we're at the time, but I just want to do this. Saul knew affirmatively that's Shmuel. Oh my God. Vayomer Shmuel Shaul, and the Samuel says to Saul, I've been resting in peace. I've been in heaven with my final reward. Loma hirgaztani lalodoti. Why have you disturbed me and disrupted me to come back to earth? I'm now receiving my heavenly reward. I realize how much better reward in paradise is than the sufferings of life. Vayomer Shaul, Sarli Ma'od. Saul says, I can't begin to describe the grievous state I'm in now. Uplishtim nilchamim bi. The Philistines are making an existential war. We might go under with this war. It threatens the existence of Israel. Sort of like what Israel's facing as Hamas is attacking on one side and Hezbollah on the other side. Iran has got Houthis from Saudi Arabia. He says there's an existential war going on here. I'm terrified. I don't know. I don't have my courage. I always would be able to go to you when you were alive, or to the priests and go through the Urim and Tumim, or a divine dream. I'm all alone. Ve'elokim sor me'alai v'lo anani od. God has abandoned me and won't answer me. Gam biyad hanavim, gam b'chalomot. I have no prophets. I have no dreams. He won't communicate by prophets or in dreams. So I've called you. Sorry. To tell me what to do. Vayom Shmuel v'loma tishaleni. V'Hashem sor me'elech ve'yarech. Shmuel says cryptically, why are you asking me? You have your answer. God has abandoned you. If he won't you can't communicate with him, and he's not brought any Kohen with Urim and Tumim in your direction, and there are no prophets, he's taken away me and prophecy from you, and he's not coming to you in a dream. Some of God's greatest gifts, sings Garth Brooks, are unanswered prayers. Well, sometimes they're gifts, and here not so. But it's a communication of unanswered prayers. God communicates sometimes with unanswered prayers. I didn't walk away when I prayed and prayed and prayed when my wife, Ellen, was dying with her with the cancer, the glioblastoma. And I prayed and I prayed and I lost her. One does not walk away, a believing Jew does not walk away with a sense that there is no God. He doesn't answer prayers. He gave me Denise. He brought Denise into my life. And I don't know what I'd be without Denise after I lost Ellen. Zichron Levach, blessed memory. But a Jew, a believing Jew, does not walk away with a sense of there's no God. You walk away with a sense that God answered you. God answered your prayers, and he said no. Right? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. And that's his answer. And that's what Shmuel is saying. God answered you. Didn't you hear him? You heard nothing? That was the answer. The answer is, unfortunately for you, no. Vayas Hashem lo kasher diber biyadi. And so what has happened is, Vayikra Hashem at hamamlacha miyadecha, the Lord God has torn away the kingship from you, Vayitna l'reacha David, and he has given it over to David. And you've already figured that out, haven't you? Saul, haven't you figured that out? Ka'asher lo shamata b'kol Hashem v'lo asita charona po b'Amalek. You did not hearken unto God and did not execute his anger against the Amalekites. Therefore, on this day, God has done thus to you. I want to conclude with a brief song. And it doesn't sound like a subject for which there would be a song, but if I can pull it up really quickly, I want to try to pull this song, and I will explain why. And of course, I am leaving on a cliffhanger. So what's going to happen next? I want to just, and of course, since we're past the time, don't hesitate to go if you have to go right now. But this, I didn't know. It's like a 500,000 song. I had no idea that this song had become so gigantic. It's just in Israel. And just as I've shared with you, and I introduced to everybody Ishai Ribo, and many never heard of him. And next thing you knew, Rabbi Fischer introduced us to Ishai Ribo, and the next thing we know, he's doing like a whole bunch of music at the March of the 300,000. So I'm introducing you to this particular song. The song goes like this. The song, and with this I close for tonight. The song takes place just after the Holocaust. It's a new song, only a year or two old, but its premise is taking place just after the Holocaust. There is a family having a Seder on Passover in April. And it's a big family Seder. And there's the grandfather who survived Auschwitz, and the father, and the father's son, the grandfather's grandson, who is the youngest one at the table, and therefore has the role of singing the four questions, Manishtana. And the grandfather is a great rabbi, and he always has a smile. He always glows with a smile. And the Seder has just begun, and early on in the Seder, as is the nature of a Seder, it comes to the four questions, and they turn to the child, the grandson, and they say, okay, ask the questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot, or well, there's a number of different variations. Mikol halaylot, shevachol halaylot. Okay. So the boy is stark quiet, makes no sound. And they can't get him to open his mouth, utter a sound, or sing. And they decide, let's go forward with the Seder, with the Haggadah, and we'll come back to it. It doesn't mandate that we stop the Seder at this point. And they go forward, and they pause at different spots, and they can't get the boy to ask questions. And finally, the Zaidi, not frustrated, but curious, because he knows this is an unusually erudite grandson. He's a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, but is a prodigy. And he knows, the grandfather knows, this boy has a great mind. And asks him, why won't you ask questions? There are 4 questions here. Why won't you ask the questions? And the boy says nothing. And the grandfather says, I know you. Are you telling me you know everything in the world right now? You don't have any questions? And the boy says, Zaidi, I do have questions right now. But you taught me that as a religious Jewish boy, we are never allowed to ask questions about God and why God did something. And I can't ask any questions right now because you taught me that we're not allowed to ask questions about what our Father does. And the Holocaust just happened. And I have questions, but I know that right now I'm not allowed to ask any questions. So with this song, I conclude for the night. And we'll hear this question again. We'll have the song again. Al Abba, regarding Dad, our Father, in this case, our Father in heaven. Lo sho'alim she'elot. We're not allowed to ask questions why God does things. We can ask, but we can't penetrate and ask with a lack of faith. We have to accept.
סבא, סבא, יש לי שאלה 50.
Let's get that back.
אתה שעברת את החושך הגדול, איזה שברון, איזה ניסיון, איך שרדת, איך החיוך לא ירד מהפנים.
How is the faith smile not come off the
אומר
face?
בן שלכת יקר, בגילך הייתי.
How do you do it?
עצר בסוחו דו, מבאל זייתי, מנהגים משונים את הרבה ראיתי, מחכה שהילד המתוק ישאל מה נשתנה.
Sweet little boy,
אבל הילד
but the boy
שואל
won't ask.
שום דבר.
He doesn't ask anything.
אבל הילד לא שואל שום דבר.
Boy won't ask anything.
הוא חץ בלי ברכה, יח"צ שובר את המצב, מחכה שהבן כבר יישן.
So they proceeded with the Seder and they ate matzah.
אבל הילד
Boy won't ask.
לא שואל שום דבר.
Ask anything.
ילד, אין לך שום שאלות, שום קושיות, הכל ברור לך, הכל מובן לך? הרים הילד את העיניים הטהורות, האמת הכל מוזר לי, יש לי מלא שאלות ואין ספור תמיהות. אבל אבא, אתה הרי לימדת אותי שעל אבא לא שואלים שאלות, כי על אבא לא שואלים שאלות, כי על אבא לא שואלים שאלות. כך גם באותם ימים, עם כל הייסורים, למרות הקשיים, ליבי כבשתי, שוב ושוב לחשתי, שעל אבא לא שואלים שאלות, כי על אבא לא שואלים שאלות, על אבא לא שואלים שאלות, כי על אבא לא שואלים שאלות, על אבא לא שואלים שאלות, כי על אבא לא שואלים שאלות.
I want to point out to you, in case you're curious, this has had 419,000 views. So now it's 419,016 or so. But there's a whole culture of Israeli music that we don't know about that I like to teach you, because I think it's important for us to know their culture and what's going on there. So this is the challenge. We, as religious people, understand that some things we just have to accept. And Samuel is telling Saul, Al Abba lo sho'alim she'elot, ki al Abba lo sho'alim she'elot. God has now made this judgment, and we don't ask questions of God. You know why? Because we don't ask questions of God. We don't ask questions of God because we don't ask questions of God. Why? Because. So that's it for tonight's class, and I'll take Janet's question. And thank you all for being here. Navi is every